It's the final round of the 1971 500cc Motocross World Championship in Holland, and a Swedish rider arrives with the smallest lead there is. 1 point. His name is Åke Jonsson. After an entire season of racing all over the world, it has come down to this one afternoon, and a single point is all that separates him from the title he has chased his whole career. Beat his rival here, and he is world champion. And then, barely a lap into the first race, a spark plug works its way out of the engine of Jonsson's Maico and drops onto the track. There was no crash. The rider did nothing wrong. It came down to a single loose component. He coasts to a stop, loses an entire lap getting the bike running again, and then does something almost unreasonable. He puts his head down and charges all the way back up to 10th. But the damage is done, and his rival, a Belgian named Roger de Koster, wins that race. And here's the part that makes it hurt. Jonsson refuses to fold. He comes back out for the second race and wins it outright. But de Koster only has to stay near the front, and he does, taking second. When the points from the whole season are finally added up, de Koster is the world champion. Jonsson is 4 points short. 4. Beaten not by a faster rider, but by the machine underneath him. And here's the maddening part. That machine was a masterpiece. It was built by a company called Maico. You've probably never heard of them, and that's the whole tragedy, because these people built what riders and magazines still call the single greatest open-class dirt bike ever made. They repeatedly built some of the fastest, best-handling machines on the planet. And in a little over a decade, this same company took that reputation and drove the entire thing straight into bankruptcy. So how do you build some of the best motorcycles on earth, come agonizingly close to the biggest prize in the sport again and again, and still lose everything? Grab a coffee. This one hurts. To understand how a company this good ends up this dead, you have to understand just how good Maico actually was, because the reputation is not an exaggeration, and it is not nostalgia talking. Ask anyone who raced in the 1970s about the way a Maico handled and watched their face change. These were German machines, built in a small town in the south of the country, and in an era when a dirt bike was mostly a big engine bolted into a frame that did its best to hang on, Maico built motorcycles that went exactly where you pointed them. On a rough, hard-packed track, a good rider on a Maico could embarrass people on bikes with more power and bigger budgets. That's the cruel setup for everything that follows, because Maico had the thing that is hardest to buy and hardest to copy. They had the feel. What they did not have, it turned out, was the boring stuff. The stuff that keeps a spark plug tight and a company solvent and a family from tearing itself apart. Maico kept proving it could do the brilliant part. It was the dull part that kept getting away from them. So here's a company that, for a while, was simply better than everyone else at the one thing that matters most, and lost anyway. The greatest bike almost nobody remembers, the champion who never got his title, and 4 Japanese factories that showed up and quietly rewrote the rules of the entire sport. It starts, like a surprising number of great machines do, with 2 brothers and almost no money. The company was born in 1926, in a garage in a small German town near the city of Tübingen. The man who started it was Ulrich Maisch, and at the beginning there were no motorcycles at all. He ran a round-the-clock car repair service and sold bicycle and motorcycle parts on the side. The name Maico is just his own name, filed down. Maisch and Company, Maico. Ulrich had 2 sons, Wilhelm and Otto, and it was the sons who caught the disease. By the early 1930s, the boys had the family building complete bicycles. That went well enough that they got ambitious, and from the middle of the 1930s they were building their own motorcycles, small 2-stroke machines with the family name on the tank. Then history did what history does to German companies of that era. The war swallowed the business, and the factory turned to aircraft-related work for the war effort. And when it ended, that history left a mark on who actually got to run the company. Under post-war denazification, former Nazi Party members were barred from holding controlling shares in German companies. Wilhelm had been a party member, Otto had not. So Wilhelm could not keep majority control of the firm the family had built, and it was Otto who emerged as the controlling owner. A brother stepped aside for a brother. Hold on to that, because decades later, the same family's inability to get along is going to help put the whole thing in the ground. But that's the future. In the late 1940s and 1950s, the mood is different. Germany is rebuilding, people need cheap transport, and Maico starts turning out its own two-stroke engines and complete bikes. They even take a swing at little bubble-shaped microcars for a few years. Nothing about this modest post-war outfit says future racing legend. And yet the thing they were quietly getting very, very good at was the exact thing that would make their name. That thing was handling. And the signs were there early. All through the early 1950s, riders on Maicos were bringing home gold medals from the International 6 Days Trial, the brutal multi-day endurance test that punishes any machine that can't survive a beating. Rough ground was where these bikes came alive, and that was the clue to everything that followed. By the 1960s and into the 1970s, Maico's identity was narrowing to one thing. In the mind of the public, and more in the showroom, the name Maico meant dirt bikes. Off-road racing, motocross, big two-stroke singles built to be thrown sideways through mud and over jumps, and this is where the legend gets built. Here's what made them special, and it's more interesting than just German engineering. A motorcycle that handles well off-road is mostly a story about suspension, about how the wheels stay in contact with a surface that is constantly trying to launch them into the air. And in the mid-1970s, Maico's machines sat right at the front of one of the most important changes the sport ever went through. An American team called Wheelsmith and a tuner in Europe named Gunther Scheer took the rear shock absorbers on the factory Maicos and moved them forward, up the frame, away from the rear axle. That one change dramatically increased how far the rear wheel could travel, and it made the bike soak up rough ground better than almost anything out there. Maico wasn't completely alone in chasing this. Suzuki's factory bikes were experimenting with the same idea, but Maico was one of the machines leading the charge, and the idea spread like wildfire. Before long, factory teams and privateers all over the sport were modifying their frames, hunting the same advantage. When the whole paddock is rebuilding its bikes to match a direction you helped set, you are not just winning races, you are helping shape the sport. Maico even reached beyond the dirt. On the road racing side, a Swedish rider named Åke Jonsson won 3 Grand Prix races in the smaller 125 cubic centimeter class across 1972 and 1973. But make no mistake, the dirt was the heart of it. And nowhere did the world fall harder for these German machines than a place that had no business loving a small European brand at all. America. In the early 1970s, motocross was exploding in the United States, and American riders wanted the best equipment they could get their hands on. What they wanted over and over was a Maico. The big machines, the 400 and the 440, became the bike to have in the open class, the top displacement category where the fastest, most powerful bikes ran. And they wanted it for one reason above all, that razor handling, again. On the hard-packed, fast tracks that American racing loved, a Maico's combination of sharp steering, strong forks, and smooth, torquey power made it brutally hard to beat. At a place like Saddleback Park in Southern California, hard and dry and unforgiving, a well-ridden Maico was almost unfair. The proof showed up on the results sheet. There was a German rider, Adolf Weil, who became a Trans-AMA champion racing these bikes in the States. And to American fans in that era, Weil on a big Maico was about as good as motocross got. The name carried real weight. If you were a serious open-class racer in America in 1973, you either owned a Maico or you were losing to one. Think about how strange that is for a second. A small family firm from southern Germany, an outfit that started in a repair garage, had become the aspirational machine for the fastest dirt riders on an entire other continent. That is as high as it gets. That is the top of the mountain. And this is exactly the moment to introduce the crack that runs through the whole beautiful thing. Because the same riders who loved these bikes had a nickname for them. And the nickname was not kind. They called it Maico Breako, fast, gorgeous to ride, and prone to breaking. That was the deal you signed when you bought one, and nobody in history paid a higher price for that deal than the Swedish rider we met at the very start, 4 points short in the mud in Holland. Because the spark plug in 1971 wasn't the first time a Maico had let him down with a world title on the line. To feel the full weight of it, we have to go back one more year, to 1970. Jonsson had come over from Husqvarna, another proud European brand, to ride for the Maico factory team in the biggest class in the world, the 500cc World Championship. And in 1970, he went to the final round with a real shot at the title. The man leading the standings, Arne Kring, was sitting on 80 points, but he had been badly hurt earlier in the season and couldn't race the finale. Jonsson had 77, Bankruptcy had 76. So Jonsson knew exactly what he had to do: win the last round, and the championship was his. And then, once again, his own bike turned on him. During the race, a fork tube worked loose in its clamp and slid up far enough to puncture the fuel tank. The fuel drained away, and Jonsson's championship drained away with it. He didn't finish. Åberg took the title, and Jonsson ended the year third. So put the two seasons side by side. In 1970, a loose fork tube empties his tank and costs him the title. In 1971, a spark plug falls out and costs him the title by 4 points. 2 years, 2 final rounds, 2 moments where the fastest package in the sport simply could not be trusted to hold itself together for one more afternoon. And in 1971, it wasn't only Jonsson. His teammate Weil finished third in that same championship. The talent was there, the speed was there. The machine everyone else was hacking up their frames to copy was there. The one thing missing was the ability to reach the finish. 2 years, 2 titles, right there, gone. And I know that's a lot to sit through, so if this kind of story is what you're here for, take a second to subscribe, because this channel is full of them. Now stay with me, because the mechanical heartbreak didn't stop in 1971. By 1972, the championship picture had changed. De Coster and his Suzuki were running away with the title, and Maico's Grand Prix season was patchier than before. But the bikes found one more way to torment their rider. At the final round in Luxembourg, Jonsson won the first moto, then led the second one deep into the last lap, when the machine ran out of fuel underneath him. This time it didn't cost him a world championship. De Coster had that wrapped up already. What it cost him was second place in the standings. He slipped all the way to fourth. Even when the title wasn't on the line, a Maico could still find a way to strand its best rider within sight of the finish. Now, if you love a good story, here's the piece that keeps this from being pure tragedy. That same year, 1972, Jonsson went to the United States for the Trans-AMA Series, the big American races, and he was untouchable. He won 9 races in a row. 9. On the Maico, beating the very riders who kept beating him in Europe, De Coster among them. When the package held together, Jonsson and that bike could be almost impossible to beat, which only sharpens the knife, because it proves the speed was always real. The only thing ever missing was the last few percent of reliability that turns a great season into a championship. And that word, reliability, is the whole ball game from here on out. Because while a German family firm was building the fastest, most heartbreaking motorcycles in the world, something was happening on the other side of the planet that was about to make fast but fragile a death sentence. Here's the timing that makes this a tragedy instead of just a decline. At the very moment Maico should have been most worried, they were arguably at their absolute peak as bike builders. In 1981, they released an open-class machine called the 490 Mega 2, and this is the bike. The American magazine Motocross Action, one of the most respected voices in the sport, would later call the 1981 Maico 490 Mega 2 the greatest open-class motocross bike of all time. Sit with that. In the judgment of the people whose entire job is to know, Maico had just built the best open-class motocross bike there had ever been. In 1981, they were still capable of building the finest machine in the world. And it did not matter because the people they were now racing against were Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki, and those companies were playing a completely different game. Remember, DeCoster took that 1971 title on a Suzuki, and that Suzuki was the leading edge of a wave. Just how big Maico's handling advantage had once been is captured by a story riders still tell. When Jonsson moved to the Japanese factory Yamaha in 1973, the tale goes, he bolted a set of Maico forks onto the front of his new works bike because nothing Yamaha gave him steered as well. Jonsson himself later said that wasn't quite true, that they were actually special works forks built in Japan. But people believed the story instantly, because that was exactly the reputation Maico's handling had. That was the gap the Japanese had to climb. And climb it they did. Their bikes weren't bulletproof. Works machines from every country still broke pistons and bearings and chains. That's racing. But the Japanese factories were pairing rapidly improving handling with deep engineering budgets, relentless development, and enormous production scale. And on average, their bikes were simply more dependable, and getting more so every single year. A racer no longer had to choose between a fast, fragile European bike and a dull, reliable Japanese one. The Japanese bikes were becoming fast and reliable at the same time, and once that gap closed, Maico's fragility got a lot harder to forgive. Now the boring stuff comes due, all of it, at once. The first blow was self-inflicted, and it was the Maico Breako curse striking at the worst possible time. In 1982, chasing the industry move toward a single rear shock, Maico rushed out a new single shock system built around an Italian unit from a maker called Corte and Casso, and it was a disaster. The shock shaft started breaking, sometimes within the first couple of laps of a race. And it wasn't only the supplier's fault. Maico had used Corte and Casso shocks before without this kind of carnage. What was new was the linkage, a new rising rate design so aggressive that it fed enormous loads straight into the shock, more than the shaft could survive. The company whose entire identity was built on having the best suspension in the world had shipped a suspension that came apart on the track. For a brand already fighting a fragile reputation, at the exact moment the reliable Japanese bikes were taking over, it was catastrophic. The second blow came from inside the house. Remember the brothers and the ownership handed from one to the other after the war? By the early 1980s, that same family was tearing itself apart. The feud had spread beyond the two brothers into the wider family, and competing interests fighting over who controlled the business. And it drained money and attention at precisely the moment the company needed every bit of both to survive. So here's the picture at the start of the 1980s. Fragile bikes in a market that had turned decisively toward reliability. A famous new shock that broke. A family at war with itself. And four Japanese giants with vastly greater development budgets, production scale, and dealer networks closing in from every direction. In 1983, it ended. Maico filed for bankruptcy. The name flickered on for a while the way these things do. To get around legal complications, some bikes were sold in America under a different badge, M-Star, and small-scale production limped along until around 1986. After that, the name would get bought and revived by one owner after another, chasing the ghost of what it used to be, never coming close to the real thing again. But the company that built the best handling motorcycles in the world, the outfit that had America cutting up frames to copy it, the team that put a rider 4 points from a world title, that Maico was gone. So go back to that Dutch circuit in 1971, and a rider clawing his way back through the field after a fallen spark plug cost him a lap, winning the very last race of the season, and still losing the championship by 4 points. That single afternoon is the whole company in miniature, a machine good enough to lead the world, undone by the one thing it couldn't be trusted to do: keep running. Maico had the genius. It had the feel, the speed, the handling that people are still chasing on forums and in restoration garages 40 years later. What it never mastered was the unglamorous discipline that lets genius actually finish the race. Tighten the plug, route the fork tube so it can't split the tank, ship the shock that holds, keep the family talking. The Japanese understood something Maico never quite did. Being the best on your best day was never going to be enough on its own. What counted was being there, running, every single time it mattered. Maico built what many still call the greatest open-class dirt bike ever made, and it never won the championship that mattered most anyway, because the world doesn't hand its biggest prizes to whoever is fastest on their best day. It hands them to whoever is still standing at the finish. Jonsson never did get his world championship. But if you ask the people who were there what the best handling bike of that whole era was, a lot of them will still, without hesitating, say the same name. Maybe that's its own kind of title. If you want to see what happened to the people who beat Maico, the story of how 4 companies that used to make looms, pianos, and warships took over the entire motorcycle world, that one's right here.